They put me first so you can all be like, let's see what the new kids got. Thank you for coming. Thank you for the weather for complying. Thank you to this amazing staff. You have been so welcoming to me. I know that this is a tight family to step into, and I don't take that lightly. Thank you to Gwen and Adam and Leah, mostly for already doing all the work, but for putting your trust in me. My reading is right at 10 minutes, so I'm just going to jump into some of the things you need to know beforehand. I'm reading from the middle of a short story of mine called A Late Arrival, which actually takes place about 2 hours east of here. It follows John and Bonnie, who are a married couple in their 60s. The conflict centers around their 40-year-old daughter, Mallory, with her girlfriend, who is trying to get pregnant. And we learned right before this that Mallory has had her tubes tied, so that the new grandchild won't technically be part of the family by blood, I guess. And so this is really bothering John, who is both deeply religious and deeply stubborn. Bonnie, who we're going to follow in this section, is the wife and mother trying to keep her family together. She has her own conflict she's trying to work out. And this follows John and Bonnie as they go to the hardware store and then their Bible study. And one last thing, right before this, we see Bonnie take a pill. All right. The hardware store was on the way to church, and they drove back roads to get there. Bonnie's stomach fought back against the curves, and she cracked the truck's window a few inches to allow the crisp outside air to unspool the tension in her belly. "I know you don't want to talk about Mallory," Bonnie said in the truck, "but she's coming, and you have a choice to make. You can be a part of our lives, or you can keep being the grouch that you are." "Nothing has changed," said John. "Can you even imagine us as grandparents?" "There's no use trying to imagine it, Bonnie, because Mallory can't get pregnant." He stopped at a red light in front of the hardware store. "And I don't want you bringing this up at church either. I don't want everyone knowing our business." He pulled into the parking lot, and a blur of green caught Bonnie's eye. A man in flip-flops and tan-colored pants twirled inside the white lines of an empty parking spot about 10 removed from the store's entrance. A green, threadbare blanket spun behind him, and it made Bonnie think of trash eddying in a gutter. "Oh, God," John said, "that guy's back. Watch out for Mr. McSpinney over there while I'm gone." He opened his door and stepped one foot out before looking back over his shoulder to Bonnie. "And if that's not a sign of the end times, I don't know what is." Bonnie shook her head in agreement. She lifted her phone, snapped a photo of the man, and texted it to Mallory. "Looking forward to seeing you tomorrow. Can you believe this?" John had disappeared into the store's entrance. Mr. McSpinney danced near an empty shopping cart. "Be nice, Mom," Mallory wrote back. "It's not kind to take photos like that. Have you talked to Dad yet?" Bonnie didn't understand why she couldn't take a photo of a man twirling stupidly right out in the middle of a parking lot, or why everything had to be written down on a phone. But she wasn't about to explain on this tiny screen how complicated everything had gotten. "Just come," she replied. What Mallory didn't know was that back when she and John had stopped speaking, Bonnie had asked John if he might be willing to help her research medication for depression. The next day, he walked into the living room while she was playing mahjong on her phone, saying he'd booked her an appointment for a therapist in Knoxville and to be ready to go within the hour. The therapist had photos of her family a little too aggressively displayed for Bonnie's taste, but she let John drive her there once a week. Bonnie talked through most everything with the therapist, but made it clear she thought it was silly because there were people in the world far worse off than her. And her therapist replied, "Just because it isn't heavy, Bonnie, doesn't mean you aren't carrying it." They worked on Bonnie recognizing what she could and could not change. She added "can" sentences to her daily routine. "I can make decisions for myself. I can fill my time with meaningful things. I can look past the present to the future I will create." But when the therapist asked what that future might look like, Bonnie felt a rumbling of squirrels in her belly. She had made a vow before God to stay with John for the rest of her life, but Bonnie loved her daughter with a fierceness that often caught her by surprise. Even though Mallory had lived hundreds of miles away for more than a decade, Bonnie still lay in bed some nights with a murmur in her chest, the same tickling sensation she had when Mallory was younger, orbiting around her, always just a little too exposed for Bonnie's comfort. And how was she supposed to explain a murmur to John? He'd catch wind that the conversation was about emotions, and all of a sudden, he'd catch wind that the conversation was about emotions, and all of a sudden a door would need fixing. A shelf hung, a leak in the upstairs bathroom might actually be in the walls, and is that the future God wanted for her, she wondered, because Bonnie knew this need to protect her daughter would never go away. A few nights a year, still, it woke her up breathless. The therapist put down her teacup and asked if Bonnie felt she could ever be truly happy without her daughter in her life. And when Bonnie said no, the therapist hissed and asked her to rephrase it as a can sentence. And Bonnie thought for a moment of a life where Mallory was even further removed, where the murmur matured into a ceaseless, connatural hammering. "No," she replied, "I don't think I can." That night, Bonnie walked right in on John watching This Old House reruns and said, "I know you haven't quite yet figured out what God feels about lesbian test tube babies, but Christ, John, that child will be a part of our lives, and there is nothing you can do about it." He didn't even bother to turn down the television, just looked up with an air of annoyance while a man on TV bore holes into drywall. "So help me, Bonnie," he said, "I will never allow that child in this home." Now, John knew he'd gone too far, because the next day there were pink orchids on the table from Petal's Palace, which meant he had driven the 45 miles to Ooltewah and back before she even got up. After that, Bonnie's therapist agreed that medication was an appropriate next step given Bonnie's, and her therapist used this exact word, condition. Maybe something like that also happened to Mr. McSpinney, Bonnie thought. Maybe he had a family somewhere in a nice house who just didn't have the space right now for his condition. And it was with that thought that the Lord touched Bonnie's heart, and she decided to give the man $1. She dropped her shoulders down and raised her chin up to the open crack in the window and let out a little yoo-hoo to catch Mr. McSpinney's attention. "I'm going to give you $1, Bonnie said. $1. The green blanket lost the wind and hung down over the man's gaunt frame. He turned toward her, eyes wide with a grin, already one step in her direction, and Bonnie realized she had been impulsive again. Stupid, really stupid, Bonnie, she thought. He took another step, then a hop, then a knees forward waddle until he was right up on the other side of the glass with yellow teeth and a breath that frosted the glass. "Hey!" Bonnie heard John's voice yelling, You get away from her." Bonnie watched as John came around the front of the truck waving a 2x4 he had bought for a neighbor's patio. She half expected the man to hiss and crouch like a vampire exposed to light, but Mr. McSpinney just smiled and waved the $1 at the sun. Back inside the truck, John shook his head, started the engine, and rolled up the window with some of Bonnie's hair caught inside. "Ouch," she said, pulling until John noticed and rolled the window down to free her. "What was all that horsing around for?" she said. "He wasn't doing anything." "Christ, Bonnie," John said, "you trust a pit bull with a room full of bacon." Now we're going to church. Their church was set off from the road by a gravel lot canopied by hemlocks. Bonnie walked behind John through the crowded church cemetery, stepping over weathered grave markers and small plastic American flags trembling in the evening chill. It was an old church, but that's why Bonnie loved it. Inside, the rooms were small, the walkways narrow and dark, the soiled carpet packed down from years of hand-me-down dress shoes and children spilling vacation Bible school lemonade. Bonnie could walk through its halls blindfolded and still find her way. When they entered the basement room when their Bible study met, they were welcomed by the quiet settling of the sanctuary above their heads and folding chairs already arranged in a half circle so that even if they hadn't shown up, at least somebody would miss them. For the past 16 weeks, their Bible study was watching and discussing a DVD course on the second coming of Christ. They arrived just as the lights were dimming. Bonnie smiled and offered quick waist-level waves to others in the group as she passed by, grateful not to have to explain why the right side of her hair looked like a wild turkey had gotten into it. She couldn't see or hear all of what was being said on the television, but she didn't care. Bonnie didn't understand a lick about the book of Revelation, and that was just fine by her. John had set her down early on and explained that it wasn't to be taken literally, but as an allegory, and how all the scary stuff like the plagues and fires and earthquakes of the tribulation would happen after they were gone anyway, as if that made one hill of difference. What Bonnie didn't understand, and what no one in the Bible study seemed willing or able to answer her, was why God had to make it all so complicated in the first place. There were trumpets and horsemen and thrones and lions and candlesticks and white robes and calves and flying creatures with faces of men and seals, which made Bonnie laugh until John told her it wasn't the wah-wah flubbery kind, but the unveiling the covenantal fury of God kind. And if God chose to lay out the entire distorted fate of heaven and earth like some TV guide battle royale, so be it. Who was Bonnie to say otherwise? When the lesson was over and the lights returned, they tried their best as a group to stick to the relevant things, the relevant things they had just learned. But within a lampshake, they were all back again to the rapture itself. how it would happen and what their options might be. For instance, would they just whoosh be gone? Or would their bodies float up for the whole world to see, rising into the blessed unknown like chicken feathers blown from below? Bonnie found this chatter useless. Besides, what kept her up most nights was not the rapture itself, but a far worse outcome. What if Mallory wasn't raptured? What if God did not appreciate how Mallory had lived her life, how she had tied tubes together that he specifically created untied, and she was a lesbian? Some scholars, Bonnie had learned from the DVDs, thought that once the rapture happened, blammo, heaven was all full up, and those left behind should go ahead and splurge on that houseboat they've always wanted before all the lakes and oceans boiled over. Others pointed to a little bit of a loophole, one that would be unleashed upon the world with the unwrapping of the fifth seal. It gave a one-way ticket to all those martyred for their faith during the tribulation, and just like that, presto, heaven could squeak in a few more souls. Now, martyr was not a pleasant word to Bonnie, but maybe, she thought, after Mallory saw all those bodies floating up to the sky, after she felt the wind pick up and the ground shake and whichever river somewhere turned to blood, she'd take a moment to really think about her own salvation. Maybe there was still hope that her only daughter would arrive in heaven just a little later than she and John. Either way, Bonnie firmly believed that she would one day be face to face with the living God, and wouldn't that just be something? What she couldn't stomach, though, what she couldn't quite bring herself to put into words during the Bible study was the agonizing possibility of being separated from her daughter forever, and why wasn't anyone in this basement talking about that? Bonnie was pulled from her thinking just in time for prayer request. I have one, she said. As many of you know, our daughter Mallory is in a relationship with a woman. She's driving home from Chicago tomorrow evening, and I don't usually ask for prayers, but I'd like you all to consider praying that God would open John's heart here. She reached over to pat him on the knee. He's really having the hardest time with it all. The group said amen, and they nodded and waved and hugged their way back outside into the cemetery. John grabbed Bonnie by the arm. I told you not to bring up our personal business, he said. He got back in the truck, and as they drove home, Bonnie said, I forgot, John. You know these pills make my mind wander sometimes. When he didn't answer, but before they hit the back road, she made sure he heard her say, and you hurt my arm, John. You really hurt my arm back there. The next day, the orchids were yellow and white. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, it's very kind. And now it is my pleasure to introduce the amazing, irreplaceable Gwen Kirby.
To be honest, I'd kind of prefer not to read and just hear the rest of that story. I'm really invested now. Oh, it's online. All right, look it up, everyone. I kept trying to think of what I should say today at my very last ever staff reading. It's been 10 years, and I realized there just wasn't really anything to say. Just thank you to the staff who have made my life so wonderful and who I love so much. And thank you all for being here. So I am going to read a really new story. It's definitely, I don't know, still a little bit in progress, but I spent more time than I expected this spring sitting in my empty bathtub with my husband because tornadoes keep coming through this part of the country, and we don't have a basement. We don't have anywhere to go if there's a tornado. So I had tornadoes on my mind, and I wrote this story. All right, tornado warning. In the middle of the night, the woman does the opposite of what she's supposed to do. While her phone vibrates with the National Weather Service warning, she puts her dog Samson, crate and all, into the safest room of the house, an interior bathroom with no windows. She shuts the door on his glinting eyes and goes outside, gets into her Subaru with seat heaters and custom yellow stitching. She drives. Except for the leisurely wail of the tornado siren, it's quiet. Not a drop of rain yet, the wind and warm gusts panting at her ankles, the yellow radar band of storm still a few miles off. It isn't that the woman doesn't know better, witness her dog safely ensconced, and she does think about turning back. She's not that far away yet, 3 blocks, then 4, but no, She wants to get to the water tower on the hill, where the new tornado siren speakers are, where the pregnant girl from 2 towns over went to kill herself, but slipped on the ladder about 12 feet in the air, fell and broke her leg, but didn't miscarry. The woman has occasionally acted rashly. In college, she let that stranger finger her outside a bar in Nashville. His fingers had been dry, and so had she. In her 20s, she bought a last-minute plane ticket to Paris after getting fired from a waitressing job, the trip a rash romantic gesture for an audience of no one. She'd spent a week alone in museums she didn't care about, and the credit card debt had taken 2 years to pay off. It's been years since she's been reckless with herself, been reckless for herself, and now she's vibrating, bursting inside the body she's become tired of, the moles on her neck that catch on her hairbrush, the crooked eye tooth that was straightened with a metal cage and now is crooked again. The body that at 42 is not yet diminished, but is beginning a little to dim. Skin duller, hair duller, nail beds more ridged. For goodness sake, says her mother, who's newly dead, if you care so much, you could put in a little effort. Her mother had been aging flawlessly, swore by moisturizer, sunscreen, and home manicures, nothing flashy, and then she died quickly of colon cancer, so quickly she'd been buried with smooth, buffed nails, only a hint of gray at her roots. The rain falls gently as she pulls into the parking lot near the water tower, and she spends a few moments searching for her umbrella before remembering that she's there to get wet. The rungs of the water tower are slicker than she expects them to be. She's wearing pajama pants, an old black t-shirt, no bra, and a pair of hiking boots, and as she climbs, she feels the wells between the ball of the foot and the heel catch into place on the rungs. She estimates it's 30 feet to a small platform, about a third of the way up the tower. That's high enough for what she wants to do, high enough to film. The day after her mother's funeral, the woman saw a video on Instagram in which a glacier at the top of a mountain fractured and became an avalanche. The hiker was near the glacier, and when she heard the sharp crack, she turned and began to film. The hiker kept her camera pointed forward, facing the avalanche head on until the last moment, past the last moment, when the ice and snow were shooting past her and she ducked behind a rock ledge and the video cut out. In the comments section, people had advice for the hiker, madly to run, as if she could have outrun an avalanche, as if the video was not remarkable, the hand of the hiker so steady. The woman reaches the small platform, and she has never been more fiercely grateful for railings. Her right palm is scraped, and blood thins out on her hand. She sits on the platforms, the railings and enclosure, her, the animal. Her cell phone is in her pocket in a Ziploc bag, dry until she needs it. She won't take it out until she sees a tornado. Will she even know when she sees it? Surely she will. It's summer in Tennessee, but the tornado is coming in on a cold front, the temperature and pressure dropping. The sirens above her are screaming now. The wind is whipping. This is the stupidest thing she has ever done by so much that the word stupid no longer applies. It is an old-fashioned madness, when madness was transcendent, ugly and performative, not done silently at home, but out in the streets to be witnessed, to be feared and respected. Why couldn't she grieve in that old way? Why, instead of tearing off her clothes and filing her nails into claws, had she been writing thank you notes to the women who had come to her mother's wake? Maybe, she thinks, if she'd run naked through her garden, had sex with a goblin, eaten the grub she'd dug from the earth, she wouldn't be here now, freezing and waiting for nothing. And just as she thinks it, she catches movement out of the corner of her eye to the right, over the northwest part of town. It's a tornado. That is what she thinks to herself, a glitch in her brain perhaps, a pause. It is a tornado. For all the wailing and rain, for all the warning, she had not expected a tornado. A tornado is dark against the green light of the storm, thin but whipping like a striking snake. She does not know about tornadoes, she realizes, how they move if they're predictable, linear. This one writhes. At first in place, it seems, but then it must be moving because it's getting closer to the water tower. The wind is fierce, the rain is needles, the tornado is coming toward her, and she is in awe. Perhaps this is how the woman was able to keep filming that avalanche, because it did not feel real. And like that, she remembers why she's here. She grabs the Ziploc bag from her pocket, fumbles the phone out, but her hands are like ice, her fingers clumsy from gripping the railing too hard, and before she can even unlock it, give it a breath to recognize her face, she's dropped it. It pings off the side, then all the way to the ground, silent in the storm while she watches it fall, and she stands there looking. And then when she looks up from the ground, the tornado is veering east, now getting further away from her again, and she feels such intense grief. It is a long time before the woman climbs back down. At first, she simply sits and does not think. Then she sits and does not want to make the climb. Her ass is numb against the metal grate, her neck stiff. She doesn't want to die. And it is different than that sensation she gets at night when the darkness is so complete. It's like she's already gone, and she knows in that way she rarely does that she is going to die. And she thinks as she lays in bed, she repeats, "I don't want to die." But here and now, she is not already gone. Here and now, her arms do not want to die. They hug her whole body to the ladder, locking around each bar as she descends. And her heart does not want to die. It hammers, pushing blood to her skin, making her feel nauseous. When she gets to the ground, it feels tenuous under her feet, and her body, which does not want to die, walks her to the car, to the custom yellow stitching. The door is unlocked. Her purse is still on the passenger seat. It isn't until halfway home that the adrenaline begins to leave her body and she starts to shake, filled with sudden certainty that when she gets home, she will find the house flattened, the garden destroyed, her dog beneath the rubble, alone in the dark. "Oh, sweetheart," her dead mother says, "you always did think you were the center of the world." But she is certain. She simply knows that she was meant to be in the path of the tornado, that she is chased after something bigger than herself, and now it will chase her back. Thank you. And now, Adam Latham.
Thank you for everyone for coming out. Thank you, Leah, for keeping me around. I know it's a challenge at times. Thank you, Gwen, for your decade of service for the conference, and congrats on moving on to the next chapter of your career at Carleton. Thank you especially to the staff. You're my family. And special shout outs to Travis for being an amazing addition to our team, and to Plum for all the hard work you've put in this year as our postbac. I'm going to read the opening pages from the novel I'm working on. I'm just going to keep reading it every year until it manifests itself. It's called The Lizard Man, and it's about two married cryptozoologists hoping to recapture the romance in their relationship. I ran down a country road that crossed Skapor Swamp. My legs seared, lungs bursting as I flew in my retro striped socks and team headband. I had a shot at taking 1,500 meters that year at state. Fog canopied the bottomlands. I was only a mile from our house, but it all felt so far from the pale yard lights under pecan trees and barking neighbor dogs. If a tendril shot out and yanked me by the ankle, so be it. I'd run there 1,000 times, but that night the place didn't sit right. Dank and still, yet so loud I could feel it. Spring peepers cried out in a high-pitched racket. I smelled turned flesh and figured it was a hit deer bloating in the weeds, or methane from the town dump. A crow screamed like it was being slaughtered. Everything was sharp and pulsing, not just me. I crossed the bridge at Gum Springs Branch and ran and walked down a turnoff to an artesian spring where I drank water gushing from a pipe beside the creek. I slapped a mosquito and felt stupid for getting scared over nothing. I splashed my face and stretched, then walked back up to the road. The figure stood, 7 feet tall, upright like a man, but scaly and slavering like an animal. Piss soaked my umbros and ran warm down my legs. The lizard man could have walked over and picked me up, bitten right through my clavicle until I bled to death in its arms. But I moved, juked it and sprinted. The lizard man quickly caught up, claws raking the asphalt behind me. I spun just as it leapt past me. The creature whipped around on all fours, and I found myself gazing into shining turquoise eyes, each slice barely rippling the shade. At once brilliantly blue and kaleidoscopic, each slice at once brilliantly blue and kaleidoscopic, radiating from a vertical aperture of pure blackness. The iris split by the dark pupil fixed me in place. That could have been it. Gore ripped out, blood-soaked road, carcass dragged into the swamp to be finished off or cached to ripen in some mossy hole. But the light that hit the lizard man's eyes was coming from the high beams of a truck roaring up the road. I leapt to the side as the redneck blasted his horn and shouted, "Fuck you." I turned around and the lizard man was gone, slipped off back into Skateport Swamp. Once upon a time, I liked Guns N' Roses, the Gamecocks, and dirt bikes. But life isn't the same after an encounter. I'm still trying to get my head around whatever the hell I saw that night when those eyes stared back into mine. So I take my lizard man collection out again and spread it across the kitchen table to study. A brown newspaper from a front page article about an attack. Bumps in the night. Lee County seeks lizard with bad attitude. My old Sony Handycam with its little cassette cartridges and hundreds of hours of footage of Wendy and me searching Skateport Swamp in high school. Digital audio recorders, a thermal cam, topographic maps of Skateport Swamp, research, and more research. And Wendy's drawings, sketches she later turned into tattoos. She actually developed a whole line: vicious werewolves, a silhouette of the muscular goat-headed Pope-lick monster, a whimsical Nessie, a cartoonish Mothman, and a few different Bigfoots. Wendy's favorite non-cryptid designs are framed hanging around the house, but I kept most of her monster sketches. She carries in groceries from the Piggly Wiggly. I help unload a Wrangler in the gravel drive. Wendy picks up a drawing off the table, the Beast of Bray Road, a werewolf in Wisconsin. Gray hide stretched over vein muscle, and long clawed fingers, sharp teeth, and yellow eyes squatting over a body beside a road. As she studies it, brow scrunched, never quite happy with her work, it strikes me how lucky I am to be married to her, or how lucky I should feel, or how lucky I used to feel. So talented, tan and athletic, wavy blonde-streaked hair falling to her shoulders, a silver nose stud and a tattoo of butterflies swirling up one arm, 2 Audubon blue jays battling the cottonmouth on the other, dressed in designer jeans and a black-collared shirt. Her artist get-up, I like to tease her. She prefers my vintage tees around the house, working in her studio or tending to her plants. She kills most of them, but keeps trying anyway. She still loves me, I think. I examined one of her lizard man drawings, accurate with 3 finger-clawed hands and scaly green skin. It reminds me I've been meaning to purchase a new night vision camera. I pull out my debit card and visit GoStop.com. The dual full spectrum and night vision camera gleams black, HD, powerful zoom, built-in infrared light. I need it. Don't you have enough equipment already, Wendy asks, looking over my shoulder. You can never have enough equipment. Besides, we make enough money to buy something when we want to, within reason. Land surveying is decent business, and Wendy is booked out for months. Well, no, that's not why she questions my purchase. She questions me a lot these days. Why didn't you make more coffee after you finished it? Oh my God, will you put your cell phone away? Do you still appreciate me the way you used to? Do you think we got married too young? I guess I can't blame her for losing interest in investigating after years without finding any conclusive evidence. She still puts up with my obsession, but I'd be lying if I said it didn't cause some tension. What kind of marriage can you have between a skeptic and a believer? When the new night vision camera arrives, I slide the lithium-ion battery into its slot. Good, because the lizard man can probably smell the alkaline kind. Bigfoot can. I flip open the screen and the camera turns on with the welcome message. I turn off the living room lights. The military-grade, full-color night vision even captures Wendy's red lipstick. She smiles in the dark and beckons me toward her, curling her finger. A memory flashes, filming her as she looks back at me after strapping a game trail camera to a tree. Maybe she misses it too. Not the lizard man, maybe, but the excitement that bound us together. When she's in a good mood like this, I can forget the way we are the rest of the time. No, it's not okay to let the dishes soak overnight. Pick up after yourself. We don't have friends. We never spend time together. All we do is spend time together. We're not making monthly payments on a four-wheeler. Stop snoring. Be still. It's like we can't have a conversation anymore. I'm sleeping on the couch. We're only fucking at 30%. Maybe we don't speak the same love language. I just want it to be like it used to. Me too. So how do we change things? I zoom in and out playing with my purchase. Wendy strikes a pose, hand on hip, slightly pouting. I give her a kiss and film her smiling. The next day she comes home from the parlor excited. I drew a new cryptid tattoo. I haven't designed one in how long? She hands me a drawing of a skunk ape. It has a sly grin, showing off stained green teeth. Reddish-brown hair covers its thin, muscular body with a bit of a paunch, like a backwood cousin cut from Planet of the Apes. I love it. I'll drop by the parlor whenever you can fit me in. She kisses my cheek. She hasn't given me a new tattoo in eons, just maintenance on my old ones. The falcon monster running across shallow water on my left chest, inspired by the legend of Boggy Creek, and the lizard man on my right shoulder, its eyes exquisite and bright, savaging a black Boss Ford Mustang 429. Why don't we just do it here, like old times, she says. I'll bring home some meat. Thank you. Leah Stewart, everybody.
So I'm realizing a good way to feel less nervous is to bring a bunch of other people up on the stage with you. I recommend it. Thank you everyone for being here. I'm very grateful for what you all do to make this community so special. And of course I am especially grateful to my staff. I cannot talk about Gwen leaving because then we will both get embarrassed. So we'll worry about that later. Okay, I am working on a novel that is heavily influenced by the many, many years I've been coming here, which started way back in 1995. I spent 10 summers doing what my staff does during the conference and then came back in 2019. And I have a friend who's an archaeologist, and talking to her, I heard a resonance with her experience of going into the field. They use the term field season, and this means the 3 weeks or 4 weeks that they are actually working on their archaeological site. It's kind of a similar experience. They go back to the same place. They have people who they only see there, and there's this sort of through line in their lives that feels as if it always exists, but they kind of pop in and out of it, and it's very separate from the rest of their lives, so that it feels like they go through a portal back into this place and pick up where they left off. Does this sound kind of familiar to people who've been here more than once? So there was that, and then also I've been working on this book since I've had this job and paying quite a bit of attention to theater and what the theater folks do. And so this book has many characters and many, many scenes with lots of characters talking. Not something I'd really done before, and most definitely influenced by watching all these plays. So what I thought would be fun, for me, is to have these guys come up here and do the dialogue for me. So I'm going to give you a little intro, and then I will read the narration, and they will read the dialogue in this scene. What you need to know is it's 1993, The characters are college students in an archaeological field camp in Belize, and it's the very beginning of a 30-year love story between two of the characters you'll see here, Paul and Caroline. Caroline and the other students are American. They know each other. They go to the same college. Paul is French, and this is only the second week he's been around the rest of them. Sean is played by Sean McIntyre, although, and you'll see why, I promise Sean, there's no relationship between Sean and this character. Antonio and Paul by Jesus Faez. Caroline by Omalolu Fiki. Amy by Emily Shane. And Patricia and Elena by Brittany Allen. Most evenings, the students hung out together in the gathering spot they'd created near the dorms, consisting of hammocks strung up on trees, supplemented with plastic chairs. There were more people in camp now, teams of adults who seemed to regard the students with an amused, almost fond interest, and so the students couldn't take over the smoker's circle anymore. They'd gotten creative with the hammocks, stringing one up above the other for a bunk bed effect. It had become a favorite pastime to hold on very, very tightly to the higher hammock and flip yourself over to grin maniacally at the person in the hammock below, looking like a Maya statue of a bat. Sean and Craig and Amy particularly liked this game. Antonio scrupulously took only the lower hammock, and Paul couldn't stop himself from thinking, quel con, which means, what assholes, every time he saw someone do it, and the other girls laughed or rolled their eyes but didn't want to participate. One evening, though, Sean insisted on making it a competition. He timed people. He'd come up with a prize, a tube of Pringles and coveted sour cream and onion. So everybody tried it once. No one fell, to Paul's relief, and Elena won, narrowly beating Sean, and marched around them in a circle, holding her Pringles aloft like an Olympic medal. After that, Sean, visibly restless, cast about for something to do. Paul, sitting across from him, accidentally met his eye.
You're a good-looking dude.
For confirmation, he appealed to Craig, who studied Paul as if trying to identify him. Sean poked the nearest hammock, setting it swaying.
Who's in there?
Amy stuck her head up.
Yeah?
Who's the most attractive of us, to girls?
No breath to consider, she just thrust her chin at Paul.
Him.
Sean sighed.
That's what I figured. Looks? Something else? Some je ne sais quoi?
She sat up like the hammock was a swing.
He's easy to talk to. He's friendly, but not at all aggressive. No one has any idea if he's actually flirting with them, but he could have been flirting with all of them. No one can be sure.
I see.
Sean grinned at Paul's discomfort.
Do go on.
She lifted her eyes in the manner of someone recalling materials she'd studied.
He's got the accent, the French accent. That's very sexy. Everybody's into that. I mean, you should hear all the bad imitations. Ooh la la, kiss me. That kind of thing.
What else?
Patricia sat up in the hammock above Amy's.
It's his hair.
Oh, yeah. I forgot the hair.
What about his hair?
It's thick. And a little, unruly. You need taming.
I'm not wild.
Perfectly true, but even he could hear that his tone suggested the opposite. He was vain about his hair, dark, thick, loosely curly. He wore it just a little bit long. He knew girls liked it. Was he flirting all the time? Elena was making her way back over from the dining hall where you could put your name on a list, pledging to pay $1 and take a cold bottled soda from the cooler. Amy called out to her.
What makes Paul attractive?
He's pretty. Why are we talking about this?
Sean asked.
Oh, well, because he's not Sean.
What is that supposed to mean?
He's sweet.
A groan from inside a hammock, and Antonio stuck his head out.
What is happening? Sweet?
He sat up and looked at Paul, each hand gripping a hammock side, swaying.
Dude, I'm gonna give you charming instead.
How do you say charming in French?
Paul could have offered them the obvious charmant, but he allowed himself mischief.
Séduisant?
Like seduce. He's seductive, Sean. That's your answer. Now can I go back into my cocoon?
Looks like you've got your pick.
Oh, don't presume now. I didn't say I found him the most attractive, just that he's the majority choice.
Are you sure your methods are accurate? What's your sample size?
Amy rolled her eyes.
Hey, Caroline.
Caroline was up in the hammock above Antonio. Paul saw her turn her head at the sound of her name, but she didn't respond.
We figured out why you got the hots for Paul.
What?
Now she sat, involuntarily, Paul thought. Her hammock swayed violently, and he watched helplessly as the red crept up her neck.
Arrête.
He didn't realize he hadn't used the English word.
Don't worry. Nothing to be embarrassed about. It's all very scientific.
Caroline was climbing down now, holding onto the tree and stepping carefully onto a stump. On the ground, she struck a power pose.
Hey, Sean, which of us do you think would win in a fight?
Some oohs from the crowd, a loud bark of laughter from Sean.
I'm a man.
She tilted her head side to side, pursing her lips.
We're about the same height. I'm a black belt in Taekwondo. Yeah, it's true that men do generally have better upper body strength, but don't forget I beat you in arm wrestling last year. And I know how to use my legs.
I bet you do.
Patricia and Antonio had climbed down now, too, and stood beside Caroline. Patricia had told Paul she hadn't really known Caroline before this trip. Patricia was a year older, but they seemed to be best friends now.
But who would win? You didn't answer her question.
Ha.
We can find out if you want.
Jeez, you'd rather fight me than admit you have the hots for Paul?
Her eyes flicked to Paul, then back to Sean.
Yes.
Patricia said something to Caroline in rapid Spanish, making her laugh. Paul caught más pequeña del mundo and cabrón.
Hey, I might be an asshole, but I'll have you know I'm packing. You should be so lucky, chicas.
Your Spanish is so good.
She had an air of maturely changing the subject.
My mother is Mexican. I grew up bilingual.
Are you halvesies too?
Nah, my parents are both from Colombia. You, my friend, are ignorant.
How come you're not doing archaeology in Colombia?
How come you're not in Ireland digging for potatoes or whatever the fuck?
Yes, go there, Sean. I bet there's lots to find.
Lots of gold.
Maybe we should be digging for cocaine.
There was a silence.
Digging for cocaine.
He said it slowly so they could all observe the stupidity together.
The digging would go faster once we had the cocaine.
That's a good point, Elena. Sean, I think you're onto something.
How's your Spanish?
Man, it sucks. My parents moved to the States as little kids. They can talk to their parents, but they didn't speak it at home. I'm working on it, but I have no gift for the language. If I don't get better, I might always have to work in Belize.
I'll help you.
I'm not as good, but me too.
You are good.
I am good. Not as good.
Okay, cool. Steady buddies.
I speak Spanish.
You go to Colombia then. Bring us back some excavated cocaine.
Hey, fuck off.
Sean, you wound me.
Where are you from?
Bainbridge Island, that's right by Seattle.
You have coloring like Snow White.
My father is the palest white man you've ever seen. His eyebrows are invisible.
Patricia pressed her arm to Caroline's.
I'm whiter than the white girl.
My mother always tells me I have sallow undertones and should never wear yellow.
What is salo?
I don't know exactly. That's funny. I'm really not sure.
Antonio held out his arm.
I win.
Others came over to join the comparison game. You've got a scar here, and wow, look at all your freckles. It was a welcome excuse to touch, as when they hauled each other out of pits, played a boardless game of Twister on the helipad, a return to the animal intimacies of childhood. They might have slept curled up together like kittens in a basket if the world had fewer rules. Even at moments like these, Paul didn't risk touching Caroline. We'll stop there. Thank you. Thank you, guys.